Welcome to Maccabee's second Sharper Angle digital event. I am Paul Maccabee, president at Maccabee PR in Minneapolis, and here's why we are gathering here today. Broadcast media has pivoted during the pandemic to keep staff safe, and interviews have shifted from in-studio and on location to remote or mobile segments. In this afternoon Sharper Angle event, we are excited to share with you insights from 3 on-air talent and producers, explaining how TV and radio is continuing to evolve during COVID-19, a bit about what stories these journalists are looking for, and how marketers and PR pros need to adjust their media relations strategies. Good news, we are recording today's session. And after this is over, in a follow-up email, you will all get a link so you could listen to it or share it. Some quick housekeeping. Please mute yourselves so that we don't hear your dogs, your cats, and your babies. If you have questions, please submit them into the chat box, and we will make sure to address as many of your questions as possible. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our 3 panelists today. We have Roshini Rajkumar from WCCO Radio, Brittany Runck from KSTB-TV, and Mike Augustyniak from WCCO-TV. Roshini, lightning round, would you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Paul and the Maccabee team. Roshini Rajkumar, I'm a past television reporter and host. I fell in love with talk radio while I was in TV news. I left television. I most recently, as a reporter, was at the NBC in Detroit. That was way back in 2006. I left television news to start my business. I'm an executive crisis coach and strategist and a professional speaker. But I put into my business plan that I wanted to have a radio show one day, and that came true in August 2012. So I'm happy to say this month I celebrate 8 years of Real Talk with Roshini on WCCO Radio, and I definitely use some of my background in TV to produce and host my show, and really have developed some wonderful relationships with guests. And then last year in 2019, we launched my podcast, Real Leaders with Roshini, which are 15 to 20 minutes, unscripted, unedited, other than adding in the music, because even if someone swears, we keep it in because it's a podcast. And that started last year, and we're in season 2 right now. And I mention it partly because I'm sure some of you on this Zoom, as well as some of your teams, could be prospects for the podcast also.
Thank you, Roshini. Brittany of KSTB-TV's Twin Cities Live, tell us who you are.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So happy to be here. My name is Brittany. I've been working at Twin Cities Live as a producer. It'll be 4 years in November. And prior to that, I was a reporter, a morning reporter at Kello in Sioux Falls. So I was up at 2:30, going live at 4:30. And so I have that background in reporting. My start in TV was at KYC-TV in Mankato. And so I have both reporting background as well as a producing background with Twin Cities Live. I handle a lot of their social media as well. So I kind of handle organic content as well as manage our sponsorships. And outside of work, I'm an online health and fitness coach, creator of Brit.fit. And so I just love personal development, growth, and yeah, so that's kind of what I do.
You must work 18-hour days.
It's a little busy, yeah.
Mike Augustyniak, WCCO-TV, and we have learned fan of the legendary Frank Sinatra. Mike, what should we know about you?
Apparently I was born in the wrong decade, so I will start with that, I guess. So I am, and I'm going to correct you, but Paul, it's totally fine because a million people misspell and mispronounce my name. It's Augustyniak. And it's been happening for 41 years of my life. It is not a problem, but I figured just for anybody else who's curious. So I have a very weird position, very weird job at WCCO Television. I am the director of meteorology, which means that my primary role is to be a meteorologist. I grew up in New York. I went to the University at Albany for my bachelor's and master's degree in atmospheric science. And then when I came here to Minneapolis in 2008, I was put on the morning show on WCCO, and that role meant that I was able to become more than just a meteorologist, more of a co-anchor, and also I have started up a franchise called Mike's Mix, which was weekly before the pandemic, and now who the hell knows how often it's going to be on television, but it's a tour and an introduction to a lot of the Twin Cities and greater Minnesota area cocktail bars and the cocktail scene. Same thing with Western Wisconsin. Through all of that, my role has sort of evolved to now be a co-producer, co-anchor, and meteorologist on our Saturday morning newscast, which is where I currently ply all of the trades that I do. And we are a lifestyle-focused newscast that does a lot of events based sort of features interviews. So again, I have many hats and I do many things, but I'm here today really representing sort of the producer aspect of what it is I do.
Mike, thank you. That's wonderful. Let's begin with a lightning round question for all three panelists. What is the single biggest change that the pandemic has caused in how you perform your job? Brittany, do you want to start?
Oh, again. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I have to say in my almost 10 years of broadcast media background, I never ever thought that it would be something that we would have to do remote. And everything, it would happen back in March, obviously, as we all know, but we really made the decision to pivot within a day. So we went from full staff of 11 of us to then had a meeting, and the next day more than half of us were working from home. And that meant that it was just wild to think back how all the changes we've had to implement just since March. And so the biggest thing, of course, was as a staff, we had to work remote. That meant a lot of collaboration, a lot of communication. And we're a show, Food, Fashion, Fun, that is all about bringing guests to us. That's what we've been doing for the last 12 years. We've been on since April of 2008. And so it was really kind of navigating what this all meant. We didn't know the timeline, right? All of us were uncertain at that point. Like, what is this going to look like? How are we going to continue on our show? Because that was important to us. We wanted to make sure to provide new, fresh content to our viewer, but also and be authentic to our brand, Food, Fashion, and Fun, but not be tone deaf with everything, the fear and the uncertainty of what was happening in our world when the pandemic started. So I think the biggest change as a staff was what we had to, everything went virtual. And then it was really training our guests on what that will look like, because it's they're no longer going to be able to come into studio. So how can we really create valuable content that looked a lot different? And I can go into that, but that was the biggest change. Never ever did I think that I would be able to even have that option to work remote. But thankfully, our executive producer, Christian Answer, he's very tech savvy. And so I can go into this later, but we were able to implement Skype right away with our guests. And what that looked like behind the scenes was a very crazy setup. We basically took his laptop, connected onto Skype, and then took a studio camera, turned it around, and that was our setup. So behind the scenes, it looked, how is this even possible? But after a while, we just took it one show at a time, and now we have been able to add Skype into our control room. So it's essentially like a live shot, because, wow. And that I can expand on, but there are a lot of changes we had to implement, and we had to implement very quickly.
Brittany, that was awesome. Roshini, what's the single biggest change for you in your job at WCCO Radio?
Well, definitely that I am not in studio. So I got my Yeti mic, and we have a software called Clean Feed, which several of the hosts had to learn how to use. Some of the hosts are not on it. There is some tech equipment that some of the weekday hosts do have, which is a much harder line back into the studio. So a big challenge with the Clean Feed is you're keeping your fingers crossed that you don't have a cable issue on your end or an internet issue. There's not something that happens in the studio to break that connection. During the week following the violence, following the death of George Floyd, I was on the air at some points at 1, 2, 3 in the morning, midnight, and that isn't always the best time for something to go down. And things did. One night, though, it was when Mayor Fry was having his 1:30 in the morning press conference, my line went down. Luckily, we had him on the air, so my studio coordinator and I could reconnect. But those are some of the things that have been worked out for the most part. Many of my shows on Sunday this spring and summer were clear and we didn't drop, but that is something that all of the WCCO radio hosts who are using Clean Feed have to deal with. Now, none of the hosts are in studio. Our studio coordinators they're deemed essential employees. I was one of the first hosts who like begged my program director, let me sign a waiver, let me come back. And he said, corporate's not letting that happen. There is major social distancing in our studio. So even if it were me and Devin in the studio, we are very far from one another, but corporate just doesn't want that right now. So I miss the in-studio relationship with my studio coordinator. I also, and Paul knows this because he's been a guest on my show, I also have a lot of my guests in studio with me, and that provides a wonderful rapport because we can see each other, we can talk during commercial breaks. And so now they are all on phone and they have to hear me through me being on Clean Feed, and sometimes there are audio issues with that. But I'm happy we're still able to do the show when there's not a Twins game, and really still being able to bring this content to the air. But that is really the biggest change that I've felt. And just a little programming note, insider note for all of you. We found out last week that Entercom, who owns WCCO Radio, we are not the same ownership anymore as WCCO-TV, but they have told us from the corporate level, we are staying at home, working from home until January 1st. And unless there is a special arrangement with our respective managers, and I will once again try to get in studio, but I'm doubtful they're going to let me do that probably until late fall at the earliest. Thank you,
Roshini. Mike, what is the single biggest change in how you do your work, particularly your production work, Mike?
So I agree with everything Roshini and Brittany said. And so rather than just duplicate what they said, there is at least one positive to this setup that I'm going to name. And that is that we now have the flexibility to do interviews with people that we wouldn't necessarily be able to get to in the appropriate or at the appropriate time for their event. And we're also able to cover events in locations that maybe we would not have been able to get a camera to before. We, as the Saturday morning show, only have the ability to shoot one package for the weekend. And often because of my on-air schedule, being an anchor on the air 5 days a week, as opposed to my co-anchor, who is a reporter 4 of her days a week, she was the only one that was often able to get out and shoot stories. And we also, frankly, were under the suggestion to keep those story shoots to an hour or less and make sure that they're close to the station. We, like everybody in broadcast, do not have enough staff to do what it is we do. And this is that was sort of the middle ground that we had figured out in the pre-COVID era to get us fresh content of any kind. Now I can do an interview or 2 a week. Jen can do, Jennifer Mayerly is my co-anchor, by the way. She can do an interview or 2 a week. We can do them from home if we want. We can shoot them for real in the field if she can get out. But this combination of a readjustment to our viewers' expectations that not everything is going to be perfect or high quality, combined with the technology aspect of Zoom, where as you're doing, we can record an interview in the cloud using Zoom, has given us a lot more flexibility than we had before.
How fascinating. Question for all 3 of you. What advice do you have for media relations marketers, media relations pros who want to pitch you a story, a guest, particularly if that story has nothing to do with COVID-19 whatsoever, whether it's how they reach out to you or how they frame their guest or their story? Any of the 3 of you, what's your advice for PR pros who are pitching you now? Brittany. Oh, I'm sorry, Mike, go for it.
Okay. No worries. I was just going to say, make sure that you know that at least when it comes to what Brittany does and what I do, we are still a visual medium. And just because we have a Zoom screen, that does not make good video for an entire 2 to 10 minute segment, depending on what show you're on.
So Mike, do you want B-roll? What visual props what visual elements can PR people send you?
I will say that B-roll, even if you have shot it on your iPhone and then upload it to us later, is better than, in my opinion, than doing something live. Most people's homes or offices are not set up quite like ours are for broadcast. And so we have an image quality issue when you're doing a live stream versus something recorded in HD using your phone. We usually have a lighting issue. We sometimes have, I did an interview in the recent past where it was shot with a handheld phone. Investing in the tools that make for good visuals, even in this era, are your responsibility as a PR person.
Mhm.
Excellent. Brittany,
Yeah.
what should PR people know about suggesting a guest or a topic for Twin Cities Live?
Definitely. You know, we get a lot of pitches daily. And so I think number one is to be persistent. If you pitch us once and we didn't get back to you, that doesn't necessarily always mean a no. It's just that priority is today's show. And so that is where our attention is going to be. If I had someone follow up with me 3 times and we actually did book a live shot, but it was because of that persistence and just really adding the value and keeping it really short and sweet. Sometimes we get pitches that it's just so much information and you're skimming through and they're like, what are you pitching? And so I think be more clear than clever, and also know the show, do your research. Sometimes we get pitches, and this is not a knock, but it says, you know, Brittany, this is a great segment for your morning show. We're an afternoon lifestyle show. And that, although that's simple, it tells me that they're probably pitching this to everyone just to see if they can get a bite. So also we get sometimes like, they lead with the stats, and we're a lifestyle. So I think it's more important to really think about what's the story or the impact and why would our viewers care versus trying to get my attention with an alarming stat. I think that feels better when you can really, and to Mike's point, I really want to just quick add this. If once we book the segment pitch, if they're the ones that are providing me all the info with the timeline, the outline, along with the elements like pictures or video B-roll, before I even have to follow up, that is incredible. And honestly, it makes me want to work with them again because I know that they're going to go above and beyond by providing the elements that we need to make it a very visually interesting segment, but also that they're going that extra mile because they really want to make sure that their client, is just getting that, they're making a good impression.
And Brittany, before we turn to you, Roshini, when you say pitching you a story,
Yeah.
do you like email? Do you like telephone follow-up? Do you want to get a box with something in it sent to your home? What is the best way to approach you to propose a guest?
That is a great question. I don't know if there is like one perfect way. I mean, for me, as a producer, email works great. We do receive quite a bit of press kits. I would say if you're going to send a press kit, just, make sure it makes sense. Like I wouldn't, and have intention behind it, not just send random free stuff just to send it.
Does the press kit, Brittany, go to KSTP-TV or should they send it to your house?
Oh, we usually, that's a great question. We usually get press kits sent to KSTP, Attention Twin Cities Live. So I've never received one at my personal home. So, but
it'll get to you.
Received quite a bit, and it is great when it's a new business, especially if they can try the product. That there's no guarantee if you send a press kit that will cover it, but it does get our attention, and it's something that we may think about. So there's so many ways, but just persistence and making sure that it fits. Like sometimes we get a lot of news pitches, and so it's really just thinking like, is this fall in the bubble of food, fashion, and fun? Does this add value to the viewer? Because while we want to inform people, we're also in the business of entertaining too and adding value.
Thank you. Roshini, what's the best way to approach you with a guest, with a topic, and maybe what's changed in the way that you like to be approached?
Well, email is definitely good. And I agree with Brittany, keep it short and sweet. You know, when I get emails or press releases that are this much black ink on paper, I just get exhausted looking at it. So it's clear it's a generic release that went out. So the more customized you can be to a show, a producer, a host. I mean, when someone writes me and says, Roshini, this would be a great panel for Real Talk with Roshini. Like, first of all, they even know that I have panel segments, you know, things like that. Or if they're understanding that my show is Sundays once a week, and if they have no sense currently of the baseball schedule and they're pitching me for any Sunday in August, I'm not going to be able to do it. So, you know, there might be a rain out. I may have to go on the air last minute, so it doesn't hurt. But knowing that my schedule is generally once a week, every once in a while I do fill in during the week, and anyone who's pitched me that I can't get in on my show or timing isn't going to work, if it's a good pitch, they're the first people I go to when I have to cover during the week. So that pitch is so important, really customizing it to the host. In my case, I produce my show also to that person, to that station. And to Brittany's point, you know, it's food, fashion, fun. So, you know, a murder follow-up is not the thing to send to Brittany. And people who understand that will get booked. But it's still shocking to me, Paul. I mean, you have pitched my show so much and you know how to do it. A lot of your clients have been on my show, but you also know what not to pitch me. You know, so that's really important. And currently there is no excuse for not doing audience analysis on hosts, reporters, anchors, producers, because most of them have social posts or social handles, platforms of multiple platforms. And there are bios, you know, on different sites and things like that. So just do that homework. It really goes a long way. And to Mike's point about, he was talking about visualizing. I just had a client recently who yesterday was on with Rena on Care 11, and today was on Mid-Morning with Jason and Heather. And it's this event that they usually have every year, but now they can't because of COVID. So they're turning it into helping people have their own events, either virtually or small at-home gatherings. Well, last week, my mother co-hosted one of those events with their cardiologist. She came, we took pictures. They weren't able to send a camera. We said they could. They didn't have the resources to send a camera, but both Heather and Rena asked Dr. Courtney if we could get pictures. So I spent a lot of my time taking pictures, you know, of the different people, socially distanced, but that gave a little bit more of a visual that Rena could use yesterday and Heather and Jason could use today. So the more you can think of visualizing, you know, and even for my show on radio, I post pictures of my guests. I ask all of my guests, Paul knows this, please send me a headshot, or in action, that's even better. And remembering for social, we need horizontally laid out pictures. So please, please, please have headshots of your clients in horizontal position, you know, not position, sorry, horizontal layout. Sorry, Mike, don't laugh. Horizontal layouts, including the headshot, because a lot of times headshots are vertical or boxed. We really need that horizontal layout for all the pictures. And then I better shut up.
That was great, Roshini. So,
may I follow up, Paul, quickly on what?
Yes, wait. Yes, Mike. In 5 minutes, we're going to start taking questions. Okay. So continue to mute, but feel free in the chat box to send questions for any of the three or all three panelists. Mike, go ahead.
Just quickly. I will admit that I am not a Minnesotan, and I often do not act like a Minnesotan because I am in fact a true blue born New Yorker. So this may not be for everyone. However, I will say that early on in the COVID outbreak, I got what was clearly a very generic pitch from a national PR agency. And the pitch was something about how eating their snack food could boost your immune levels and battle COVID-19. I screenshotted that, tweeted it out, and said, there is no way in hell I'm booking I didn't identify the person. I said, there's no way in hell I'm booking your guest, but you are now on my never hire list for PR people. So, I mean, probably not everybody would do that, but be very aware that a bad pitch can be as off-putting as a good pitch can be important to your client's success.
Oh, it's so painful to hear that, but so true, Mike. Just a moment ago, Roshini, you used the magic word social media. Could the three of you, let's say starting with you, Brittany, could you talk about the role that digital social media whether it's Instagram, Facebook, etc., Twitter, is having in your broadcasts, whether it's before, after, promoting a segment, etc., and how has your use of social media for your show changed perhaps since March?
Yeah, that is a great question. Again, along with producing, I handle quite a bit of social media at Twin Cities Live, managing both the Instagram and the Facebook page. You know, I honestly would say priority number one was how can we get content on the air and make it look decent? Like Mike said, give ourselves some grace because it's going to look very different. Once we got a handle on that, of course, we paid attention to social media. I would say it was just looking for ways we could go above and beyond. People are home, they're perhaps spending more time watching TV or scrolling on social media. So myself and another producer, Lisa Adams, thought about like, how can we get creative and still highlight these businesses that perhaps have been struggling, or what have they been doing? So how can we continue that conversation and add more value beyond what you're getting on Twin Cities Live? So we started this initiative called Twin Cities Live Local Look, where we just wanted to just have a raw conversation with these business owners and just see how they've been able to pivot during these times. We would just record it on Zoom. It was we just bootstrapped it, put it together, and it wasn't fancy, but again, it was just creating more additional content. I would say that honestly, I don't know if it's changed so much. Again, our priority was always like, what can we do? We had to manage our guests on air, and that was like our main focus. And once we got that kind of under wraps, we then started looking at social media and how we could add more content to it. Does that kind of help and make sense?
Yeah, that was excellent. Roshini, you are very active on social. What has changed as far as the role that social media plays on your radio program?
Well, I don't know that anything has changed specifically because of COVID, Paul, but I think really seeing how there is a role for each platform based on who you are as a brand. So for example, I had a guest from a company called Grasp. It's an HR company, and he was talking about a topic about mentorship. So normally I don't know that I would have an HR topic on my show, but this mentorship idea. And I thought, well, during the time of COVID, this is terrific because people are wondering where they're going next. Here's a great positive, uplifting topic we can do. Well, he's based in Spain. His company is based in London. He happens to be from Minnesota, and his parents were listening from Edina, which was kind of sweet. He did a shout out to his grandma on the air. But social allowed us to not only his team did pictures and were reposting my posts, but it kind of gave us this nice global audience. And right away, they responded with appropriate pictures that we could use on social across my platforms. They used them on their platforms. They retweeted me. So another really key player here, or zone, for all of you as PR professionals, is what can you do on social to augment your segment? And I would say, and Brittany and Mike can talk about this, when I see a brand or a guest doing that, or their team doing that and tagging me, tagging WCCO Radio, I'm responding, I'm sharing that. The station's handles are also. That in my mind just makes them a wanted guest in the future because they're not passive about it, right? One thing that I think is kind of silly is like I will be tweeting Sunday, Saturday, Friday, leading up to Sunday, and we'll tag certain brands, and some of them don't share those or reply on them until the day after the interview, which is kind of odd. Now, if they do a post on a Monday or Tuesday and embed this segment, which Paul, you guys do that a lot with your guests, that's really great because then, this is on-demand world we're living in. People aren't necessarily going to tune in at the time of the exact show live. So that is another really good thing that PR folks can do to really I'd say, kind of put themselves in really good stead with any show or producer or host, because you're showing us that you're really engaged. You want to propel your brand by also tagging us. And it's just, there are a lot of win-wins in that. And the PR folks that get that are some of my go-to sources. Like, for example, I'm expecting a rainout coming up any Sunday now, right? In August or September. And Paul is definitely on my, short list of 3 of PR folks I'll reach out to and say, who you got? I have 24 hours or 12 to put a show together. Who you got? And that's only because he's been a consistent, and his team, consistent pitchers of my show, and really easy to work with.
Thank you, Roshini. I am blushing. Mike, how do you use social media, particularly as a producer, and has anything changed since March vis-a-vis social media?
Roshini's point of tagging in a tease for an upcoming interview, the PR person, the interview subject, whatever, and them not amplifying that is a little confusing to me. Look, I also don't get paid to do social media, and I also kind of resent being on 24 hours a day, but it's too bad. We all have to do it, and if you're being paid by somebody to be their amplifier, then that's also kind of your job, no matter when it posts. But again, I'll take a little bit of a different tack here. I don't think we do anything differently as a show. We certainly always have and continue to post our segments after they air and get clipped for the website. We post them on our Facebook page and share them across social media that way. And then we definitely do look at and see what gets traction, although the truth is that the Facebook algorithm doesn't always mean that 2 comparable topics will get the same traction from week to week. But it's interesting to see what people respond to versus don't. We have noticed that a lot of in-person events, or what used to have been in-person events, are now going on to social media in one form or another, be it an Instagram Live, or one particular thing that we covered early on in COVID that comes to mind is the North Loop Business Association or Neighborhood Association's Bizingo, which is business bingo. Where it's Saturday nights. I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but it's literally a bingo game where if you buy something from one of the North Loop restaurants or shops, you get a free bingo card or 2, and then you can sit at home and play bingo. And if you on Facebook Live, and if you win and show them your card, you could potentially win a gift card to one of those North Loop businesses. Those segments early on, when people were trapped inside because it was still cold out, were getting like 1,000 or 1,500 live viewers on a Saturday night, which is an insane number of people sitting in their house watching a stupid Facebook Live broadcast, but it worked for them. And as a PR person, if you can think about events that you used to rep or have repped over the years that now have to withdraw or change their venue, I would say that we would be very apt to cover something that is now being held online because it's so accessible to everybody.
Excellent. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to turn to our audience, our guests who are being so kind to watch this, and we've got some questions for you there. Some people have even talked about COVID-19 fatigue. To be honest, as far as being a PR pro and a former journalist, I can't get enough. I want Tony Fauci 24 hours a day, but I know that there must be people in your audience who go, please God, I don't want to hear another depressing story about a pandemic or an economic crisis or unemployment. Give me something else. How do the 3 of you balance being responsible journalists, but at the same time, balance stories given obviously the stressful nature of what's going on all around us? Any of the 3 of you?
I think really quick, in the beginning, that was all we knew. So that was the main focus. Everyone wanted to know about it. So I would say for the first couple of months, from March till at least May, we divided up our show from the 3 p.m. was more of our brand lifestyle. And then the 4 p.m. was more of our newsier. We had a series called Your Questions, Your Community, where we had Dr. Arkel Giorgio basically take questions from our viewers on Facebook and answer all COVID related questions. And on top of that, we also, to Mike's point earlier, what has been really great about this, ironically, has been the flexibility of being able to interview guests from all across the US. So we were able to connect with Dave Ramsey's staff who, specialize in financial piece. And we were able to interview them. Like, what should you do with your stimulus check? What should you do if you were furloughed? So I think it was trying really intentionally to create valuable content, because when you turn on Twin Cities Live, you know what you're going to get, but also be aware that people perhaps want to know more about what's going on. So it was definitely in the beginning a balance. And after a while, we actually started getting emails pouring in that said, hey, thank you for still being a bright spot in our day. Like they could tell we wanted to basically, we wanted to kind of balance them together. But after a while, May, June, July, it has kind of pivoted again. But in the beginning, we definitely had a focus and a balance of talking about both points. Entertainment and COVID.
Roshini, you cover a broad swath of topics on WCCO radio. How do you balance everything from the reckoning on racism in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, coronavirus, the economic crisis, with other stories that could be about something else? How do you find a balance?
Well, part of it is easy for me because I myself had COVID fatigue early on. And so you figure if it's going to bore the host or just, it's not going to get covered. But to be fair to the public, there is also a newscast at the top of every hour on our air. So both, and we are now, even though we're not owned by CBS anymore, we do take CBS National off the top, and then the local anchor does his or her newscast. So there's like 6 or 7 minutes of news there, and for sure there will be COVID headlines there. What I try to do on the COVID front is take it to the next level. So for example, we had a family therapist who was on and talked about just the importance of communicating, whether that is through some of the COVID issues or through economic crises items, and it also, unfortunately gave us a whole new zone of topics since Memorial Day. So a lot of that, and they're very much in my lane. I'm a licensed attorney, though I don't practice. So the legal side and the Constitution, these are definitely hot topics on my show. Guests and people who pitch me usually know that. So I kind of got to the place where I saw a lot of my colleagues doing a lot of COVID stuff. So I sort of looked to myself as a respite from COVID 24/7. And what's the next level, like sort of a COVID defense, or giving you some positive content, news you can use if I was going to do COVID. And that's really how I handled it. And then also the open phones function, which I can do on my show, really just hearing from people, and sometimes you need to give them a light topic. Sometimes it's like, well, patios are open now. What's your first, what's your favorite? Which one are you going to go to? And I'm a big restaurant lover and supporter. And so we took texts, we took calls. Some people said, no way, Jose, am I going out? Some were like, oh, here's where I'm going. And so just giving them a chance to talk is also a way that we can handle that topic.
Thank you, Roshini. Mike, we have 5 more minutes, but we want you to be the first one to answer an audience question. Okay. So someone in our audience said, what has been the most creative or out of the box interview that you have performed since social distancing went into effect? You may answer that however you wish, Mike.
We had a relationship with a local band named Yam House, which is based actually in Western Wisconsin, but they spend a lot of their time in Minneapolis. And Yam House sort of became friends. They were able to put together a recorded as live performance of one of their songs out of their little house that the band, of course, the band members live together. Why wouldn't they? That's what you do when you're in your 20s and you're in a band. And they have a practice and performance space in their basement. They played for us on Zoom a song. So one of the first COVID weekends we had when everything was shut down and people were freaking out, we had a live to tape band performance on our show that they not only performed on Zoom for us, they were promoting, by the way, a fundraising event to help bands in the area with all the venues shut down. They did it as live on Zoom, but they also had their street team there shooting it in high definition at the same time and routing their audio through their audio board and recording that. They then posted that, uploaded it to us, and the interview portion we used on the air via Zoom, but then we were able to cut to the high quality footage of them playing. For us in particular, we have been desperate and craving more bands and performers to do something like that and to be savvy about that so that we could do something like that week after week. A lot of people have not realized that there's a need or a want for that could also perhaps lift their sales on iTunes or their streams on Spotify or what have you. So that was a great interview that for UPR people who are watching this, we would love to be able to recreate with other bands in the future.
That is so great. Roshini, the most out-of-the-box interview you've done since COVID-19 hit?
You know, I don't know that Brittany probably has a better answer because most of my interviews have been on the phone and I'm sitting here in the home studio. You know, the craziest was really having the guy from Spain only because that was the farthest distance in a while. So I'll let Brittany answer because I'm sure you have. I mean, I remember seeing one of your fashion people, Brittany, had to be in her closet and give tips for closet wardrobe cleanup.
Brittany, can you explain that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Roshini, for saying that. So that was our fashion expert and blogger, Amy Seaman. A lot of this has been trial and error, you know, so what we have our guests. One thing I wanted to quick say too is we've had to rely a lot on our guests to go above and beyond with providing visuals. So what that looked like is, again, them sending pictures and video. So for the example of when our guest was in the closet and explaining like a fashion segment, obviously we can't have a fashion show in our studio anymore. So that meant Amy, for one example, her past segment, she went to different thrift stores and recorded herself explaining some valuable tips on what to look for, what to find at various different thrift stores. And then we kind of put that into one piece for a 6-minute segment. But one thing I just want to touch on too, there's so many segments that I could talk about, but I think it's just how our guests have been able to adapt. You know, you miss that element of the in studio, and the camera shot. So when you think about it, it's just a 2-shot, like, you know, you're on Zoom and then the Elizabeth and Steve are in the studio. So we don't have an overhead camera, especially with cooking, you lose that. And so when we have our guests send us time-lapse videos, it's incredible to be able to do that. And then one thing that we did creatively as producer team is, since we're a cooking show, we lose that kind of like Elizabeth and Steve being able to try the food. So we've, in some cases, have actually made the dish. You know, I guess I like to cook, I like to bake. So I one time made a chocolate cake and then they got to try it and then they had a funny bit, like, oh, Brittany made this cake, and then it was the recipe that our guest was highlighting. So we've been really creatively thinking, how can we, you know, still have those fun, memorable moments, even though it may not look the same.
That was so helpful. We're going to end with a PR technique question. Someone asked, can you touch upon pitches going to several shows and or reporters at the same station? So I believe what the person is asking is, there are times where a PR agency will send a pitch to 11 reporters at the same outlet, or producers, editors, assignment editors, news desk, etc. Does that put you off? Or should PR people be laser focused in going, this is perfect for you? Or is that just fine if you know that other people in the newsroom are getting the identical pitch? Any of the three of you to respond.
This is one of my pet peeves. I will say, I know it's your job to get your client on as many shows as possible. That is fine with me, but please don't pitch me and not tell me that, hey, I also mentioned this to Jason and the morning show producer, because I have had to cancel interviews last minute when we find out that the person is on mid-morning on Friday, and then it's going to be on our show Saturday. I don't care how good your guest is. There's just no way we're not gonna do that back to back like that.
Yeah, and I'll follow up from Mike. So what I recommend, because sometimes I'm in a position to advise clients on pitching, and I always say this is where really developing high-level rapport to the extent that you can with individual hosts, producers, assignment desk managers is so key, right? So even with this heart health pitch that my client sent to Rena and to Heather, we did little different angles on both of them. And I even said to her, these pictures I'm sending you, send them different pictures. So they even have different pictures to use on the air, right? Because everyone's going to agree that's a great topic. But then she specifically did not pitch any other reporters at CCO-TV or KARE 11. So the more you know about a show, about an individual, you know, I was taking notes on what Mike was saying because I have some ideas to send him from some of my clients, you know, really understanding what really makes them tick. And another thing, you know, all three of us are on social. I follow them. I know, Mike, you have some fun weather-related posts that you put on Twitter. Just because you maybe don't have a segment coming up with Mike or with Brittany or with me, if you see that we've posted something and you want to start a conversation, do that, comment. You know, I saw this funny thing about the worst jobs and the best jobs. And I shared the list. It was really funny. And I tagged all these meteorologists, and Mike was one of them. My guy, when I was in TV in Nashville, one of him, you know, like 5 meteorologists I take, and Mike was the first person to respond and share a comment. So that shows that they have personality, and you're building the rapport. And that might be a point of contact. Like, hey, Mike, I was commenting on your barbecue thing last week on Twitter. Now I have this to pitch to you. It just shows Mike that you're taking another step and interest in him. So I cannot more, like, if you remember nothing else from me, that audience analysis of your host, your producer, whomever you're pitching, that is so important.
The three of you have been absolutely awesome. It's very clear this could continue for another hour. Thank you to Brittany, Mike, and Roshini for this discussion. Everybody listening should know that this Sharper Angle series, and it is a series, is held monthly. Our next one is scheduled, put it on your calendar, for September 15th at 8 a.m. in the morning. It's going to be about influencer marketing. When most brands think about social influencers, they think about a stylized post on Instagram, but influencer marketing can be so much more than that. So join our guests on September 15th. We will send out an invitation. We'd love to have you there. Thank you to the three of you, and thank you for everybody who's been listening in.
Thank you.
Have a great day, guys.
Thank you.